I'm good. Friday after 11. Yeah. The following week.
Good evening. We're going to call to order the Monday, December 10th, 2018 meeting of the Regional Transit Board of Directors. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Director Budge? Here. Director Hansen?
He's somewhere nearby.
He's here.
Director Harris?
Here.
Director Hume?
Here.
Director Jennings?
Here.
Director Miller?
Here.
Please note we have a vacancy for Folsom as of 5:30 today. Director Natoli?
Here.
Director Chenier?
Here.
Director Cerna?
Here.
Chair Kennedy.
Here.
With that, we have a quorum at 97 votes. This meeting of the Sacramento Regional Transit District will be cablecast without interruption on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel. Tonight's meeting will air on December 15th at 2 p.m. and replayed on December 18th at 1 p.m. and webcast at www.sacmetrocable.tv. It is also closed caption. Members of the audience wishing to address the board should fill out a speaker card located at the rear of the room and provide it to me or Adam. Please speak into the microphone and state your name for the record. We would appreciate everyone turning off their cell phones. Thank you.
Thank you. And would you please rise and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item.
First item is the consent calendar, items 1 through 10, and I have a couple of announcements on the consent calendar. Please note that on consent calendar, item number 5, the resolution has been modified to correct the parcel number to match the issue paper. There's a copy of the corrected resolution at the dais and in the back of the room for the public. Also on agenda item number 10, there's an incorrect statement about very healthy is reached when the AQI is above 200, and it should read very unhealthy. And that is my announcement.
Move approval of the consent calendar as revised.
All right. We have a motion by Director Budge and a second by, where'd it come from? Director Jennings. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Next item.
Motion carries at 97 votes. The next item is public addresses the board on matters not on the agenda.
Actually, I'm going to go back a couple of items to introduction of special guests because I believe Mr. Boggs is here to join us this evening. Welcome, sir. A familiar face.
Mr. Boggs.
Thank you for being here.
It's delightful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Next item is public addresses the board on matters not on the agenda.
Okay, we have Robert Copeland.
I'm going to speak as a Sacramento Tenants Union member. not Sacramento Transit Riders Union, but Sacramento Tenants Union member. How can people ride the bus when most of their money goes to rent? You ought to figure that out. I mean, every city council member or a county board supervisor, do something to lower the rent in Sacramento, and then you may see more ridership. And as far as some of these bus routes we have now, they're ridiculous. I mean, at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, they end. It's ridiculous. Extend them. Like the 25 and 26, and do something with that Arden Del Paso light rail station. I consider that a dangerous station. Thank you.
Thank you. Arthur Ketterling.
Thank you, Board. I wanted to just bring up just one thing. I would mention it to the clerk that, like, on the, you probably may see it on the card that on train car 205A and 205B, it's given headways before the train even gets there, and it's given wrong designations on the announcements. I even lost the last time from the meeting that I was over. I don't know if it's still that way or not, but I can tell you the last time when I came over here at RT with the meeting that at that I missed my stop because it was so dark and all, and I was trying to pay attention to what it was saying and how where I was. I couldn't see, but I did get back on track. But that was car 205 and 205 A and B on the light rail, and then with bus 28 near Sunrise Mall, right after they start leaving Sunrise Mall, where they make their left just a little past the Sunrise Mall after it makes its left turn before it gets to Fair Oaks, that it on the head sign it says Monday, it specifies yet for Monday through Saturday, and you haven't had 28 run on Saturday since you cut back service back in 2009. And I was wanting to call your attention to that, and that's what I was going to just mention is all.
Great. Thank you, Arthur.
And thank you.
Thank you. It's all right. Next item.
Next item is new business. Item number 11, intent motion, extending the term of the current chair, Patrick Kennedy, and vice chair, Steve Hansen, for one more year as chair and vice chair of the SAC-RT Board of Directors for 2019. If you need a description, I'd be more than happy to provide you with one.
I think that's self-explanatory. Yes, Mr. Cerna.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and put a motion out there to extend the terms for both the chair and the vice chair. But I would wonder out loud here and offer it for perhaps a little broader discussion whether we got to just make this kind of the standard expectation for leadership on this board. I think the first time, at least since my tenure on this board, that we did that was when Jay Schneer served as chair for 2 consecutive years. The idea being that there were a number of initiatives at the time, some of which started on my watch when I served as chair before Jay, and there was some value in continuity of leadership and having the current chair have his or her thumb on the pulse of what was going on for something greater than 12 months. I think there's something to be said for that. So while I'll look for a second to move that Patrick and Steve continue their service in their respective leadership capacities, I'd offer that up for discussion to see what other board members think about perhaps instituting that as a regular expectation, 2-year terms for chair and vice chair for this board.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Mr. Chenier.
Thank you, Phil. I'll second that. I think it's important. I think Patrick's done a great job as chair at this time with some of the initiatives that we've got going on, the listening campaign through STA and some others. The continuity is really important as we're trying to figure out how we go. We've kind of settled in a little bit since Henry's taken over as general manager. I think, all things but ridership are going in the right direction, and we need to figure out the ridership piece. So I think just continuing the work as it is great, and happy to have the other discussion. I think the continuity is important in a lot of ways. So I'll second the motion on Steve and Patrick. I think that's a great team. And I assume that there's another time when that would come back, since it's not agendized, a rule change.
Thank you. Mr. Harris.
So I think it's a good idea and concept, but if we started now, wouldn't we get into a little snafu at the next election cycle?
Could be. Well,
it might work or it might not. I just wanted to toss that out there, although I think it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, you could say the default would be 2 terms unless the person's not.
It doesn't work. Right. Yeah. I will, not speak to directly to this, but to Director Cerna's comments. I think the only board that we sit on that does 2-year terms is AQMD, and I think that there's real value in it, particularly the more complicated and the more technical the issue is. You just get, your sea legs, and then 12 months is up pretty fast. So I would agree with that.
Many of the things that we're engaged in, obviously, they're slow-moving ships, so to speak, and it takes a while for them to turn.
Right. Vice Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the confidence of those members who've spoken. I don't necessarily endeavor for a 2-year term should I be selected as the future chair, but I will say, having been chair of AQMD for 2 years, that I would validate the idea that it does allow you to get deeper into the issues, really, because we're an agency that is still rebuilding in many ways, not only ridership, but operations, and trying to reposition ourselves for the future of mobility. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I also think that anybody who does rotate through the chair could always decline to do a second year. But I think the term should be set at 2 years, and that can come back later. But also, I do acknowledge in that that means that fewer of us, which is one of the reasons I feel mixed emotions about it, means fewer of us will get to serve as chair in the tenure we serve on this board, and especially because we have city, county of Sacramento, and then we have our other wonderful cities, Rancho, Citrus Heights, Folsom, Elk Grove. I want to make sure that if we do something like this, that rotation is respected, and that they, not just because the city has 4 members here, the county has 3 members, but that they also have a chance, so that rotation gets settled as well, so it doesn't go city, county, and there's never a Rancho chair. But really, we've done Andy, which is a Folsom, currently Supervisor Kennedy, and if we went to the city next, then it would have to go back to one of the small cities. And I think our rules don't necessarily reflect that, but I think if we're going to make the term change, we should also enshrine the ceremonial rotation that we've honored.
Just a point of clarity real quick. We don't have any member jurisdictions that have term limits, do we? Because I think that would be a different, something to consider if
Self-imposed.
Director Budge.
Yeah, I appreciate Director Hansen bringing that up, because that was my first thought. It would simply take a lot longer. David Sander was chair in approximately 2004 when we first joined RT. And I don't remember being on this board when anybody from Citrus Heights was chair.
About 10 years ago.
And I apologize, Pat, if somebody from Elk Grove has been, I just don't remember.
Pat was the chair when I joined.
Okay.
It apparently was a very memorable year.
Sorry. But yeah, that was my concern. So I appreciate Steve bringing it up so that if that discussion comes back, it be a very comprehensive discussion.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would just like, let me make sure my mic is on.
It's on. You're on.
Okay. I would just like to chime in that our Enabling Act requires that a chair be elected every year. So if we were to go to 2-year terms, we'd either have to do what we did in this instance, or we'd have to change our enabling legislation to allow longer terms. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Technical part of it.
Okay, we have an intent motion on the floor by Director Cerna and seconded by Director Chenier. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Motion carries at 97 votes, and this will be brought back to you at your first January meeting to ratify. The next item is item 12.
Mr. Chair, just before Cindy calls that, if I could, I just wanted to go back to the consent calendar, if I could, just for a moment on item 4, the calendar that we approved, if I could. And just wanted to offer a comment that the calendar was mirrored this year's calendar, but that the November meeting falls on Veterans Day, and that maybe we could look to having it on the 18th in between Thanksgiving and Veterans Day. It just seems to me, again, we obviously had a quorum and so forth, but we make all these other allowances for different, weekends and recesses or what. It just seems to me that on Veterans Day, we might want to have our meeting either before or after that. So
I want to thank Director Natoli for bringing that up, because it is something that the last time I felt a little uncomfortable having a meeting on Veterans Day. So I would agree.
And there are a variety of us who have really big celebrations on Veterans Day.
Right.
anyway, I just wanted to, I'm sorry to take it out of order, but I wanted to make.
No, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Vice Chair Hansen?
Yeah.
I was going to say I missed the discussion on the consent calendar, but I totally support that. And I think any federal holiday, we shouldn't have a meeting.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Back to item 12, resolution conditionally approving a new vote allocation for fiscal year 2019, effective as of January 1, 2019, presented by Brent Berniker.
Thanks, Cindy. Good evening, Chair Kennedy and members of the board. At the last board meeting, we provided an information item to the board on the new voting allocation shares as a result of the potential annexation from Folsom. We now received final approval from the City of Folsom, and we have conditional approval from Citrus Heights. Later this week, Citrus Heights will bring it to their board for approval. And as you know, the voting share methodology is based on the PUC code. When any new member annexes, it requires a recalculation of the voting shares. Therefore, we're seeking an update to this voting shares. The resolution before you has two conditions. One with the City of Folsom annexing and a conditional approval from Citrus Heights, and then one with just the City of Folsom. So at this point, we're looking for board approval of this resolution.
Questions?
One quick question.
Yes, Vice Chair Hansen.
I believe the City of Elk Grove also has an item coming soon. Isn't that right, Mr. Hume?
We do. It would be to contract with RT to provide transit service.
And does that change the voting share?
That will.
That will?
Sorry, not the contracting, then annexation would. Sorry.
So the contracting doesn't change the voting share for the City of Elk Grove?
Correct. But through this action, we will actually lose a vote, and we would not gain that plus more votes back until or unless we annex into the district.
Okay.
It's all based on annexation.
All right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, is there a motion?
So moved.
Barely.
Second.
Who made the motion?
Director Miller, I think.
Oh, Mr. Miller, okay. And seconded by Vice Chair Hansen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Abstain.
One abstention from Director Budge.
So noted. Motion carries at 87 votes.
Mr. Chair,
Or 8.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say the methodology for calculating the votes was created like 15 years ago, and there were different considerations at that time, and staff would like to further analyze that and maybe bring some a more fair calculation methodology down the road, and ask the state to change our, amend enabling act at that time.
Okay,
I just want to offer this comment.
great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Item number 13, whether to receive and file the comprehensive annual financial report, reports on compliance and internal control as required by uniform guidance and the Transportation Development Act, the report to the Board of Directors for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2018, and designate $5,172,007 to SACRT's operating reserve and place $4 million into working capital for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2018 of SACRT's $9,172,007 operating surplus. Before you is a motion to receive and file the report and to also designate those amounts into the appropriate funds, presented by Brent Berniker.
Thank you. And if that wasn't a mouthful, then I think I could say the same thing if I read through this whole report, but I'm not going to, obviously. So this report is our year-end fiscal financial audit. I first want to start out by thanking Crow LLP, the district's audit firm. We provided a little bit of information about the audit and the firm and when they did their audit engagement. This is actually their 4th year on the engagement, so thank you. From an audit perspective, there's 5 things I'd like to touch on real quickly. First, that we received a clean audit opinion. There was no material adjustments. There were 2 findings. The first related to grant reporting. The CFDA number that was provided to the auditors was incorrect in the single audit report. The auditors identified it, and SACRT implemented some internal controls to improve on that area. The second item had to do with some subrecipient monitoring. There was 2 instances where SACRT did not check for debarment prior to engaging with these subrecipients, and they were cities. SACRT identified the same issue actually through the FTA triennial review, so it was kind of a repeat finding what we were aware of in July. This was also corrected, though. Next, there was no additional reporting items, and there was no disagreements with management or difficulties with the audit firm. Okay, slide 4 is the audit covers both the capital and the operating side of the results, but for ease of use and kind of the main focus right now has just been on the operating side, so I'm going to start with that. In 2018, there was an operating surplus of $9.2 million. If you recall back in the June-July timeframe, we had estimated that surplus was going to be about a $5 million, $5.3 million range. We actually subsequently got in about $4 million of federal funds, so that was really good news. So this is a great accomplishment to have this surplus. The breakdown is broken down between fares. Fares came in at $27.3 million approximately, and the operating assistance was approximately $141.3 million, with total operating revenues of $168.6 million. Expenses came in at $159.4 million, and that's how you arrive at that $9.2 million surplus. On the reserve side of things, the beginning reserve balance was $5.3 million. There's an increase to the reserve of $5.2 million. So at the end of fiscal year 18, we're ending the year with a $10.5 million operating reserve. The other thing I'd like to point out is the remaining $4 million that we received of the federal funds is going to be set aside as working cash. So altogether, that will be $14.2 million that we've built up. The goal of building up this working cash is to reduce and eliminate this need for the line of credit. And the goal of the operating reserve is to obviously have sufficient cash on hand for an emergency. With that, that concludes it. I think at this point we're looking for the board to receive and file the comprehensive audited reports and designate of the $9,172,007 to the following: $5,172,007 to the operating reserve and $4 million to working capital. And that concludes the presentation.
Any questions?
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chair
Second.
Hanson, second by Director Jennings, and we have Mr. Chenier.
Yeah, I don't think we can let this go by without at least one comment. I mean, this is fabulous news, Brent. So I just want to say congratulations to the staff and to you for the work that you've done on this. I mean, when we started this, when Henry came, we were kind of in a downward spiral using our reserves every year. And I don't know what the low was for our reserves, but it was $1 million was my recollection on that. So I think this is just fabulous. I know we're about halfway to where we need to go to build up those reserves, but it just shows for all of our staff, I think, you know, the cognizance of what a dollar means and the ability to save. We need to continue to work on this. So I think true success in this form will be when we can get rid of that line of credit and not have to worry about it, and not pay somebody else so we can operate. So just thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
agree.
Any other comments, questions? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Thank you.
Motion carries at 97 votes. Next item, item 14, motion directing staff to release the draft SAC-RT Forward Networks to the public for review and comment for a period of at least 30 days, presented by James Boyle and James Drake.
Thank you, Cindy. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Henry, staff. James Boyle, I'm the Director of Planning for Sacramento Regional Transit, and it's my pleasure to be here tonight to be able to present to you the work that we've been doing on SAC-RT Forward. As you know, this has been a very vigorous process. We've been very busy the past 8 months or so working on this, and so tonight we're excited to be here. We have a lot that we want to show you and go through with you, and so I'm going to try not to talk too long, and hopefully we'll get through it in a speedy amount of time. So quickly, I just want to highlight some of the main objectives of our project, and really projects of this caliber for transit agencies. There's a lot of things that we think about in terms of transit agencies and what our objectives are. So a project of this size, there's a lot of different objectives. One, obviously, this came up earlier from Board Member Chenier, ridership. Ridership is important to a transit agency. It's our bread and butter. It's what we do. So that's one of the objectives of the project. Frequent service, weekend service, the types of service we offer, those are things that we need to take into consideration as we look at a project redesign. Better reliability, this is important. And this is not something that can easily be shown on a map, but a reliable system, a system that operates on time, is ultimately important to a project like this. Jurisdictional equity. When you have a large service area like we do, it's important that we pay attention to all of our jurisdictions and make sure that we're not leaving any municipality behind or any person behind for that matter. And really the important thing about this particular project is it's cost neutral. We have tried to redesign a system with cost neutrality, and that's really hard to do, especially when you talk about trying to gain ridership. So we're not adding new service here. We're not dealing with new revenue. So keep that in mind as we go through our presentation. I want to talk a little bit about our public involvement. We have been out and about in the public for 8 months. We have, you can see on the board here, we've held over 44 public workshops. We've received over 1,000 written comments, both in person and on our website. We've notified over 8,000 people in emails. We've had stakeholder meetings, open houses, virtual workshops. Staff has had one-on-one meetings with municipal staff from Rancho Cordova, Citrus Heights. We're also in constant contact with the city and county of Sacramento. We've had bus ride-alongs. So we've had people out riding our bus routes, telling our riders what's going on, and inviting them to all of our meetings. Public outreach. So quickly, I just want to highlight some of the main things we've heard from the public. Obviously, I can't cover every single thing we heard from the public, but there are some themes. And this might not come as a surprise to you, but it's important that we have it documented. We've heard we want more weekend service. We've heard we want more frequent service. We hear that very often. More late night service is important to folks. More places, which means coverage. The bus should go to more places in our area. 7-day-a-week routes. This is important. We've heard many times from people that our bus network, if it runs on Monday through Friday, should run on Saturday and Sunday. So creating a more consistent network is important, and we believe that we've accomplished that with what we will show you tonight. More weekend service, in the terms of the comments, was followed very closely behind more frequent service. So we still have some more public outreach to do based upon your decision tonight. We have some open houses scheduled. We're going to be posting things on our website, such as this presentation, maps of any proposed changes. We will translate on our webpage using Google Translate for any documents. And so also want to just remind you that, you know, these things I pointed out here are important. This isn't the only thing we heard. There are folks who, you know, are concerned about bus routes being eliminated and things like that. So it's important that we keep that in mind as well. So quickly, I just want to highlight some things about our existing network. This project focuses on the 41 fixed route buses we have now. In our total system, we have 69 fixed route buses. Those includes things such as express routes, feeder routes, and contracted services. As it stands now, our existing system, most of our resources, 23% of our resources are dedicated towards more frequent service. And when I say frequent service, I mean bus routes or bus lines that come every 15 minutes. That's frequent service. And as you know, back in 2008, 2010, we had severe service cuts to our system. And frankly, we haven't recovered from that. So there's 2009, excuse me. So, you know, that happened as well. And just by looking at the map, you can see that our bus network system is very circuitous. It's very duplicative. There's a lot of duplicity, especially in the South Sacramento area. And it's important to also note that in South Sacramento, we did not make any major shifts to the bus network after the extension to CRC. So no changes to the bus routes were made after that extension opened to CRC. And again, it's important to remember that this is a cost-neutral project. We've tried our best to realign the bus network to serve the needs of the community, to respond to those things that we've heard from the local municipalities, from our stakeholders, and from citizens. So tonight, what we would like to present to you basically are 4 networks. The first network is what we call our new network, and this will be the focus of tonight's presentation. And then we will also highlight for you a more frequent network. What would a network look like if we had a little bit more 15-minute routes in our network? And then we would also like to show you a cost plus network, and this would be the new network with approximately $3 to $4 million more that we could put towards any additional service. And then we'll also highlight for you a Measure A plus network, and this would be what if RT got a new funding source and we had, say, 40% more revenue coming in to put out in service. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to James Drake. James is the principal planner. He's been working very hard on this, and so I'm going to let him present, and then I'll come back and close it, and then we can have time for questions and comments. James.
Good evening, members of the board. Very pleased to be here to present the draft new network. Like James said, there's 41 regular routes affected in this project. Almost every one of them would be touched. And I'll start off by saying we're not under any illusion that what's before you is perfect or that every element of it will be beloved by everyone in the room. But we are very big believers both in the need for change and in the public review process. There's not a project like this that doesn't benefit in a real concrete way from meaningful feedback, and we've been fortunate to get a lot of that already. To that end, one thing I wanted to touch on before we go any further is I just wanted to make sure that everyone has in their packets, in their hand, we have one amendment to the board item, which is just a written, plain English list of every change that's proposed for every route. And we wanted to have this with the board packet, but it wasn't quite ready when we went to press. But this will be on the web shortly. Copies are available in the back of the room. And we'll have this at all our open houses, along with individual route maps that help make it more clear what's happening to specific routes with detailed changes. So our existing system, it has a lot of good routes, but there are some routes that are a little confusing to use. That's one of the kind of key takeaways. And a lot of what we've sought to do in this project is to really just kind of simplify the system. We've gone from 41 routes down to just 26 core routes on major corridors. And consistency is kind of the key word. Half our routes today don't have a full 7 days of service. And on Sundays, for example, 90% of our routes run only hourly. One of our guiding principles was, if we're going to run a route, let's run it every day, and let's run it better than hourly. This slide shows existing and new network on weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And I'll go over real quickly the color codes we used for this. The light green indicates routes that are hourly. And one of the big things you see in this chart is that our weekend service in particular is almost entirely hourly routes. The light blue routes indicate service that's every 40 to 45 minutes, and the darker blue is service that's every 30 minutes. So one of the things that jumps out is just that this project would entail improving that weekend service quite a bit in terms of frequency. This doesn't mean that we're going all in with a lot of high-frequency routes. The red routes are frequent routes that run every 15 minutes, and that includes the light rail line. And there's 4 of those lines today. There's 4 of those in the new network. But to dive into each of these days, this shows weekdays, the existing system on the left, the new network on the right. And the network we have on the left covers about 900,000 people. And you can see that the network on the right is pretty similar in size, but it lacks any of those green routes, with the exception of the Folsom Stage Line, which was outside of this project. The new network does cover only 800,000 people. So this entails, and we're being very forthright about this, this entails a slight sacrifice in terms of geographical coverage for the sake of having slightly more frequent usable service. I'm going to go to Saturdays and Sundays. And on Saturdays, you'll see that in this case, not only are we improving the frequency, we're getting rid of those green hourly routes, but our coverage is actually the same or better. And when I go to Sundays, you'll see that the existing Sunday network on the left not only is almost entirely hourly routes, but there's major gaps in service. There's no service whatsoever on Freeport Boulevard, on Fruit Ridge, on Marconi, or on Truxell. And if we kind of slide back and forth between Saturday and the weekdays, one of the things you notice is that in the new network, it's just a much more consistent network 7 days a week. It's obviously not as frequent and robust on weekends. That's not something we can afford, we don't think. But we've sought to make it very consistent. So this chart simply indicates that on the bottom line, for the routes we're dealing with, our 41 regular core routes, the bottom line's the same. It's the same amount of total service. When you look at the breakdowns by day, this indicates that this does amount to fewer hours on weekdays and more service on weekends. We are trying, and we think we've succeeded in doing more, or at least doing a similar amount of transportation on weekdays with less. And on weekends, it is a spending project on weekends. It is a higher level of service on weekends. This chart indicates just some basic stats on the system. And like I said earlier, there's not a change in the number of frequent 15-minute routes. When we set out to do this, that was something we really wanted to do. This was one of our objectives. I think our consultants did a fantastic job illustrating a lot of the benefits of a high-frequency system. But when we sat down to design it, with the money we have now, with the funding we have now, we just didn't find that it was feasible to do that without cannibalizing the other routes in the system, both weekends and weekdays, having them run at unacceptably long headways or not running at all. But you can see from kind of the upper half of the chart, what this is indicating, if it's not clear, is that, for example, on weekdays, right now, the average route in this project runs at 42-minute headways. That's the average of the frequency of all the routes. And that would go down to 30 minutes. So even though we're not adding red high-frequency routes, we are making pretty substantial improvements to frequency for our riders. This chart takes a look at the distribution of our service throughout our service area geographically. And there's two big key points I want to highlight here. First is with North Highlands. It consumes not a large part of our service today, but it's very well used. And historically speaking, what we found is that the system had never really been adjusted to account for that area being built out, for Antelope being built out. The demographics and the street design is very transit supportive, and the ridership and productivity is there. We thought it was primed to get a little increase in service. And the other big area that would stand to gain service is Arden Arcade area. And conceptually, we kind of think of downtown as the center of the network, but geographically speaking, Arden Arcade is really the geographic center of our system. It already is, frankly, a pretty well-served part of the system, but the routes we run out there do quite well. We have good ridership, we have good productivity. Being in the center of the network, our supposition is that there's both the demand for more service, and more service there will help adjacent areas that are traveling into the area or through the area. The next three charts kind of illustrate the changes we would have in both coverage and frequency. And I said earlier that today's system on weekdays covers about 900,000 people. That's within a half mile of our routes. And that's indicated by the blue bar on the far left of this chart. The blue indicates the existing system. And so you'll see there that it covers about 900,000 people. Now, if I were to ask how many people do we reach with frequent service, we know there's not that much frequent service in the system. There's 4 routes. So that number is a lot lower. The 2 bars on the far right indicate that. So the existing system reaches about 250,000 people with frequent service. And so if you compare the blue to the red bars, what you see is, like I said earlier, the proposed system would have slightly lower coverage than today's system, but what it covers would have better frequency at all different breakdown levels. And on Saturdays and Sundays, the next slide, you'll see that it's similar, but it's also kind of more extreme. On Saturdays, you'll see that the proposed system would actually reach more people with service every 45 minutes or better than we reach with hourly service today. And on Sundays, it becomes even more extreme. You can see with the blue bars that, we reach about 750,000 people with hourly service, but that makes up almost all of the service we run. Anything better than hourly service only reaches about 200,000 people. So, frankly, when we designed this, we really wanted to get the weekend service up to, mostly 30-minute service. But when we looked at the allocation of hours from weekdays to weekends, we decided we needed to pedal that back a little. We didn't want to overdo that. We want to keep some hours for weekdays to keep that service good. Reasonable people can certainly disagree about, where the correct balance is, but that's something that weighed pretty heavily in our minds. Smart Ride was not a major focal point of this project, but I want to point out briefly a couple pretty important things. These 2 charts show in gold where we currently serve with Smart Ride, and in green where we're planned to serve. And I should also point out that all the stats I gave earlier with respect to the number of people we serve, 900,000 people, 800,000 people, that's all with respect to our fixed route system. That excludes Smart Ride. With the addition of Smart Ride, which we've already made, if you include that square mileage as our coverage not only is much higher today than 900,000 people, but it would continue to be much higher than that, including the Smart Ride. This is mostly a fixed route project, but it's really important to understand that. There's a few key changes I wanted to point out here. First, in the south area, what we had kind of planned as a zone in kind of the southeast portion, or I guess I'll say east of 99, we've recommended expanding that, and that's largely to cover some fixed routes that would go away in this proposal. You've got Route 65, which currently goes through Avondale and Glen Elder neighborhoods. You've got Routes 5 and 54, which are kind of east of Casumas River College. So this would help cover those gaps. Another important change, and it's kind of small on the map, but in the North Sacramento area, we've reshaped the zone a little bit to focus more north of the freeway. And we've added some coverage on the McClellan Air Force Base, the McClellan Park property. And this would help cover a loss of coverage that we would have from a change we proposed to Route 26. We set out to make Route 26 a straighter, more direct route, but as it currently stands, it provides some direct service to destinations in McClellan Park, notably including the Veterans Clinic. And we have a small CBS shuttle route today, Route 85, that serves McClellan Park. What we're contemplating doing is changing that around into a dial-a-ride, which would provide us the ability to cover a larger area and help fill in that gap on the 26. So this next chart shows the 3/4 mile surface area we use for our complementary ADA paratransit. And in the new network, there are a few areas, which I've circled here, where we would cease to have an obligation under the ADA to provide paratransit. And while we would not be taking new customers and taking new rides to these locations, our intent and recommendation is that for people who are currently making rides to or from these destinations, that we find a way to grandfather them in, even though, we won't still serve there with a fixed route. Any major service changes require a Title VI civil rights analysis, as you all know. We have not yet prepared a full formal Title VI analysis. We will be preparing that, providing it for 30-day public review prior to approval of any changes. But we have taken a preliminary look at just the demographics of the areas we would be serving, comparing the existing network to the new network. And what we found is that the changes really would be pretty minor, and in most cases, they would probably be positive from a Title VI standpoint. So we expect that a Title VI analysis would be favorable or not significant. Like James said, the focus of this is on the new network, but we did and wanted to share a few sort of exercises, a few alternative scenarios. First, the more frequent network. Obviously, prioritizing high-frequency routes was a big part of this project. So we wanted to say what would happen if we did that, if we prioritized high-frequent routes more. In this scenario, we found we could get 15-minute frequent routes on 3 more routes, on Watt Avenue, on Howe, and on San Juan and North Sacramento. But the drawbacks would be we'd need to eliminate at least 2 routes. In this scenario, we've eliminated Route 13 on Northgate, Route 19 up to Rio Linda. And what's not shown here also is there'd be pretty significant cuts to weekend service. We'd have a lot more routes that would have to stay as hourly routes or not run at all on weekends. And like I said, you get 10 people in a room, none of them are going to agree on what the right balance is between frequency and coverage. But in our view, a scenario like this was a little too detrimental to the other routes to justify doing this. It's very expensive to run high-frequency service. And this is consistent to a lot of concerns we've heard from our ridership and our customers, although certainly not all of them. I'm going to skip over some of the kind of tabular stats on the more frequent network. It's in the packet, and I am happy to take questions on them. But I want to jump up to the cost-plus network. This is simply the new network with an extra $3 to $4 million thrown at service, and that amounts to about 4 or 5%. And that gets us frequent 15-minute service on Watt Avenue, which is a big, big thing. And it also gets us a small extension of Route 68, one of our routes in the south area, just a little bit east of 65th Street, to provide a little more coverage, a little bit better catchment area and walkability for residents east of 65th Street in the Glen Elder neighborhood. Lastly, the Measure A Plus network, as we're calling it. We wanted to be sure to do some sketch planning of what we could do with another $30 to $40 million. This would be like a 40% increase in service. And you can see here, this kind of turns it into like a big city transit system. This adds 7 frequent routes. We would go from having 4 to 11 routes that ran every 15 minutes or better. It includes an airport bus going every 20 minutes to the airport 7 days a week. It includes a little more coverage in North Natomas and a direct route from Sunrise Mall out to Light Rail in Folsom. And what you don't see on the map is it also includes budgeting for later night service and for better frequency later into the night. The next few slides are kind of more, stats and figures, and I'm going to skip those two. They're in the board packet. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to James, and I think we'll do questions. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot. So I'm going to go through the last couple of slides here pretty quick, but I think they're important for us to talk about. I'm going to skip past those. So one of the things we hear a lot from our customers is, it's not just about the bus routes and schedules, it's about bus stops and transit centers. And so a part of this project, I've spoken with our facilities folks and our engineering folks, and we're looking at creating a capital improvement program for our transit centers and bus stops. So that would also be a part of this project because, it's important that we can have a great network with frequent service, but it's important that people are able to get to that service, right? Stops, crosswalks, those sorts of things. And I would like to say that I know the City of Sacramento planning director is here tonight, and we've already been talking with the city about, these corridors and how we can start making improvements. So those things are already happening. And lastly, I want to close with some important key takeaways from what we have presented to you tonight. Number one, what we're trying to do is really create a more consistent network. And I think through what James has shown you tonight, I believe we've been able to do that. And we believe it's a scalable network. So, it might not be everything that everybody wants now, but we believe that we're creating a good bone structure system that we could easily add more service to. We could increase frequency, and we can do those things that would get us to a truly high frequent network. This network complements the new 15-minute weekend light rail service that we're going to be starting in January. So this is another important takeaway from this project. Again, no hourly routes. Like we've heard so much about that, and we understand that hourly routes can be bad for people. There are some people who do build their lives around hourly routes, and a lot of commuters, for instance, will build their work schedules or their life around an hourly route. But a bulk of the public involvement we've heard is hourly routes are not good. And other things that don't show well on a map, new and improved schedules. We've been working closely with our scheduling team, and as we move through this process and we really begin to put schedules to these routes, we will improve schedules. We will redo the look of our schedules that we print out for our customers so that they're more, user-friendly, easier to read. Better reliability. This is important to riders as well. Like I said, you can have a great network of bus routes, but it needs to be reliable and needs to be dependable. And those things cost money as well. So creating better reliability is important. Is it equitable? We believe that we've tried to be as equitable as we possibly could be in this network and fair to everyone. And I think James did a good job of showing that. And again, this is a network to build upon. So, while we can't give you everything that we wished we could tonight, we think this is a good place to start from. And I think we can get there. And as we continue to build the routes with our scheduling department, we'll look at bus stops on those routes, and there are some places where we could probably reduce some bus stops. Overall, it might not have a huge impact on the system, but it could increase reliability and speed of some of the routes. So that is it for our presentation. I know it was a lot to take in, for this evening. And James and I will be here to answer your questions. I know you probably have a lot, and we'll try our best to answer as much as we can. And if we don't know the answer tonight, we'll definitely get you an answer. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Foley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we got to hear from folks in the audience. I just wanted to pose a question, though, because one of the things that kind of jumps out of me on the maps, both looking at the Smart Ride coverage and the bus hubs, but where service doesn't exist, and that's south of Jackson Highway. And I don't know if that's east of Power Inn or east of, I assume it's east of Power Inn. You have a fairly large job center, much of which lies in the city of Sacramento with Depot Park and that corridor. And then I look at, the connectivity with the Vineyard area, which is continuing to develop if we're looking to try to reach customers. And so I don't know if we're using the Watt corridor at all, Watt Elk Grove Florin corridor, but it seems to me that if you're trying to build ridership, and again, recognizing, there's, lots of places you could have gone with service, either extended and so forth, but that looks like a pretty big hole. You talk about kind of this building the city network, and that's a critical part of the city and county. It certainly, comes up against the cities of Rancho Cordova and the city of Elk Grove. And I guess, I don't know, in your workshops and as you look at this with the consultants and so forth, whether getting some service to, a job center, but also connecting with neighborhoods, they may not fit the density, quilt patch that you might want, but we have got apartments going in those areas, different types of housing in the RD10 and 15 category. And it seems to me that as we've looked at this and continue to look at that, that's an area, again, recognizing that you've taken the money and certainly trying to improve the frequency of service and making sure you have coverage. But I don't see Smart Ride there either. And so I don't, I guess we expect people to either drive or walk or bicycle or do something else. And we're looking at, I think a significant portion of the population, but not just from a standpoint of residential, but from a standpoint of jobs as well. So I guess I'd be curious to know any comments you might have on that, James.
Sure, I'll try my best to give you an answer. Obviously, the Smart Ride map that you have in front of you is almost still a work in progress. We're still having conversations with folks about the Smart Ride boundaries. And as we continue to refine what the draft network would look like for a final network, we will work to, and of course we have to work with STA on these Smart Ride boundaries as well. But we would try to cover as much as we possibly can. I can't promise you that we'd be able to cover everybody in every job center.
No, I get that, yeah.
But, it's a tough area. Like you said in your statement, the densities are kind of lacking there right now, and the office parks are a little hard to serve. But it's not to say that we couldn't add service there as the development continued to fill in and as more funding came online. And like I said, we can examine it and look at it more closely with the Smart Ride zones, and we'll do that.
Just let me point out to you one other thing, though, that certainly in the unincorporated area, and I know the city of Rancho absorbed some of this, we have county service area 10. And the idea is that as you build density and build, in the area, homes and residential structures, that we have ongoing funding that's a part of the assessment that goes on properties. Basically it's there in perpetuity. I guess I'm curious as Department of Transportation at the county side of it has looked at this. Obviously, that's a fairly new assessment in the last 15 years. That it doesn't have a lot of dollars, but it's projected over time. And I guess it would seem to me that maybe buying into the Smart Ride, so at some point, maybe during those commute hours at least, where you could make some connections and build on what's in the city network and maybe even with the city of Elk Grove along the Calvine Road. So again, I offer that as just, I think you've done a lot of good work here in recognizing that there's going to be holes in it no matter what you do unless you had unlimited bankroll. But it seems to me that there's an opportunity that awaits us out there, and it's probably present right now. So thanks.
Thank you,
James here, Director Attorney. Actually, you're right. We worked with a couple developers over southeast areas. They plan to build up to 30,000 houses. And in last year, we worked with them to develop some transit elements. We had virtually reached agreement to provide free service to all residents over there by collecting some whatever facility fee or whatever. So that is absolutely the direction we are going, and the revenue, the fee we are going to collect from those communities actually can cover our cost. Just want to share this.
Good, thanks. Okay, Director Budge.
So I do want to thank staff for meeting with our staff. And then I want to thank James and James for coming out to meeting with me and staff today. And I, of course, am going to challenge the assertion that there's no significant impact, because when you have 4 bus lines and you now only are going to have 2 bus lines, that's a significant impact. However, we focused our conversation today on pretty much 2 different things. And one of them was the diversity of population between one part of Rancho Cordova and the fact that it's older and getting older and needs a different kind of service than the new growth area, which is younger and needs another totally different kind of service. And the fact that we may look forward to having the smart rides as the asset that fills that gap. That remains to be seen, but it's certainly something we're looking forward to. But then the other part of our discussion was exactly what Don was just bringing up, the concept of where are our destinations. Mm-hmm. And when you think about the area that he was just talking about, it's pretty obvious that something like Siemens is a huge employer down there in that particular area along French Road and Power Inn and whatever. And it is probable that there's a whole group of employees at Siemens who would be likely bus riders if there were service for them. Similarly, we looked at areas that have been served and are potentially going to be served at Mather. What's available out there and who works for something like Metro Fire or Bell HVAC company, where they have their own transportation and they drive themselves and they're not going to ride a bus, versus those people who are coming to the VA hospital and County Office of Education who currently are taking the bus and will continue to do that. So when you apply those principles to the rest of the design of this network, then it's really important that we continue to look at the destinations and not just where people are currently, but where it is they need to go and who in that body of destinations would be the likely bus riders that we could go out and catch.
One point to add, Director Budge, I think your comments are right on point. From the maps, they're so zoomed out it can be a little hard to tell, but on the smart ride zones, the zone in the south area where we had proposed changes, the new recommended zone would actually cover the Siemens facility and some of the surrounding neighborhoods.
Thank you. Okay, Vice Chair Hansen, and then followed by Director Cerna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to wait to give my comments till after the public, but because some very good questions are being raised, I just wanted to ask, as we go, assuming we pass this into some public comment period, there's some data that isn't here that I think would be helpful on this page 18 chart about jobs and population. Because it's not geographically shown, it's very hard to understand which population centers we're overlapping with.
Okay.
And which ones we aren't in job centers. Mm-hmm. So I'd like that plotted out on a map with I don't know, they use different ways to do it, but something that will help the public understand what staff are attempting to do here in lining up some of those populations with service.
Okay.
And jobs, population and jobs. Those are 2 key ones. I also know, I see our planning director from the city of Sacramento. Hi, Tom Pace. We have a significant number of units under construction in a variety of neighborhoods in the city. One neighborhood that I'm very familiar with is the area west of 5, south of 80, and north of the river. It's called River Oaks. We have about 1,000 units under construction. I don't understand, and you can feel free to respond to this later, but if we are servicing South Natomas and parts of North Natomas, why West Natomas? Why we don't cross the 5 to service those neighborhoods, which there's 10,000 people, or probably be closer to 13 or 14,000 people in a couple years there. So how are we anticipating growth with these changes? Because we've gone through a very extensive process, and I think that was the point that Supervisor Natoli was making. And I don't think we have really in this proposal. And so I think we need to have a good response to that, because I think the jurisdictions can show you where entitlement applications have been improved or where building permits have actually been pulled. And a building permit's a much better indicator that something's going to be built, because they have to pay fees and other things usually at that point. It's rare that a expensive building permit would get pulled and those fees paid but no construction happen. So I think that's a good further indicator. On that same point, commercial construction, it does look like the new Centene campus might be served here, the 5,000 jobs in Natomas. Is that correct? So it does look like we're anticipating that. But other major employers, I don't know. I don't see any Amazon HQ2 on here, so I think you did a good job.
We had to take that off.
Yeah, you had to take that off. I think that was smart. But then as we go into this, assuming we have some measure in 2020, whether STA or RT, I don't understand yet from this proposed network how we would build in bus rapid transit. And I think bus rapid transit is really one of the things our region hasn't done. And it is a phenomenal tool to move people from work to home and home to work. So
Could I add something to that?
Yeah.
I should have mentioned, and I'll do it here, we did receive a grant from Caltrans to study bus rapid transit.
When did we get that?
We got, it was awarded to us back in, August, I think it was, somewhere in there. And we're going to be starting we're going to start the study in January or February. So we are going to be looking at, and that's a great point, bus rapid transit corridors are important.
Some of these might overlap, like Folsom Boulevard. It's a sort of a no-brainer. Maybe Truxell. You talk about airport service, and there are some of these things that might be where we would allow the buses to bypass signals or have a dedicated lane, so on and so forth. I guess what I'm getting at is this bigger picture of how we articulate the values and choices made here in relationship to the data and the future planning. I don't think there's sufficient information. If I were a member of the public, I would look at this and wonder, why is this better when it doesn't appear ridership is potentially a lot higher, but there are a lot of questions that are still left unanswered. And I think we have, through Jared Walker, our staff, that information to give to the public, whether it's those who are extremely engaged here, hi Mr. Bijak, or ridership for the masses, or STAR, whoever. The last thing, two last things I'll say is, one, this augmentation of spread versus coverage. We saw in the last presentation you made some real trade-offs there about ridership. I don't fully understand yet from this, other than some bar graphs, whether we've contracted some as we've increased service, and I get that, but to be able to quantify clearly the ridership increases that we're getting for pulling back, and I guess I shouldn't say clearly because it's all going to be based on a model, but I think some better articulation of what we think the better service will provide. We want people to live near transit, but if transit is transitory, like hour service, or it's fleeting, then it's really not useful. And so if people are going to relocate because there's near a dedicated bus lane that's going to run 15 to 30 minute headways, I think that that's important information to give people, because they're not static, most of them, who are maybe renters or otherwise. They have a choice. They could live closer to one of these new bus routes. I think that would be helpful to understand. The last thing, just because it irks me, in your list here of buses, I've never seen a number 34 with more than 5 people on it. and it goes right in front of my house every day. So I don't watch it every time it goes by because I'm not always there. But the ridership of some of these current routes is abysmal, and I don't know if we save some of them for political reasons, because 34 was on our cut list 2 years ago, but we had a different city council member from East Sacramento then who loved that route, so we did not cut it. But when we have empty buses running, it takes away from areas that could get service. And so I don't understand from this either the viability of these routes based on ridership. If we have some duds in here to offset for political people who say, not my route, but we've sacrificed the greater good in serving more people who need to get to work or to a hospital or wherever. And that's not clear either. So as we move forward, the high coverage route is appealing, Measure A Plus is appealing, but I think we need to better articulate the arguments using data and evidence for why we've made these decisions. And I think you've done some of that, but I think there's more still to do during this comment period.
Okay.
Sorry for hopefully I've answered some of your questions or asked them. No, Barbara?
Director Cerna.
Thank you. So I know we want to get to public comment. I have two quick questions. One is about the outreach. I appreciate the fact that I think staff and our executive team paid very, very close attention to making sure that we did a very deep dive on outreach, and that means you're taking account the invitations that go out, the various neighborhoods that are invited. But did we keep an accounting of any of the outreach meetings, for instance, where we were expecting folks from a particular neighborhood that they didn't show up for whatever reason, and so we're going to go through all the mental gymnastics of perhaps considering new networks and different permutations of changing routes.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps those are the folks that would only turn out when the route has disappeared, and then they find themselves in the audience here. So that's the first question: is do we know both the character of who was at the table and who wasn't at the table? I think the latter is just as important as the former. So that's my first question.
Okay.
The second question is about the substance of the presentation. I'm looking at, for me, it's slide 15, but it's the jurisdictional split table. And it has 9, and this is for weekday service, it has 9 communities listed, and it shows the percent of service for weekdays, existing versus new network. And of the 9, only 3 actually show increases. The balance, the 6, either decline or stay the same. And so I'm trying to reconcile why that's preferable. Does it have to do with just making more robust the weekend service, for instance? But I'm looking at places like South Sacramento that goes from 29 to 26%. Downtown Sacramento goes from 10 to 7%. And so when I hear, one part of the presentation, a very distinct intent to look at density and all the attributes that feed ridership, but then I see these percentages drop, it makes me wonder. So I'm looking for you to help me understand that.
Okay. So first question.
Yeah.
We keep a very good account of all of our public involvement events, and I cannot recall one meeting that we attended where no one showed up.
Okay.
And we made a special effort to go to where our riders are. So we went out to our major transit centers, 65th Street, Watt. We were there several times, set up little pop-up events. So one of the big things for me in this project was to be sure that we're reaching our riders. I mean, because they need to know what's going on and not just going to the mall and setting up something and hoping people come by. So I would say overall, we were pretty successful at going where people, are at and not having them always come to us. We've attended SAC True meetings, and we were there yesterday, and they had an awesome turnout of people. So it's really good that they help us. I'm sorry, SAC True. Saturday, I'm sorry. My days are all screwed up here. Saturday we went to SAC True. So no, the second question.
Does that mean, though, you have pretty high confidence that when routes disappear, we won't have folks show up?
I can't promise you that.
Okay.
I mean, we do our best, when we get to a point where we bring you a final draft network and that's something that we're prepared to roll with, we will have people out on the buses, at the bus stops. We'll have a whole army of people out to make sure that all of our riders know what's going on.
I just can't help but think that as strong as our outreach efforts are, as surgical as they are, as well intended as they are, they're going to be people that just can't attend for whatever reason. It's their work schedule, their families, whatever it is. The fact that perhaps they relying on transit to get to some of these meetings, and the stars don't align for them to get there for some reason. But once the route gets cut, then that's kind of a different prioritization for them in terms of their willingness to come give us a piece of their mind, right?
That's very correct.
Okay.
Yes. And the second question, I'll let James answer that one.
Yeah. It might help to kind of describe the design process. I won't overdo it, hopefully, but we really did take kind of a blank slate approach to this. We started off with an empty map and said, how would you do it starting from scratch? And when we had what we thought was a good design, we subjected it to a lot of different tests, a lot of different benchmarking. A lot of the different tables, the breakdowns from weekday to Saturday and Sunday are an example. But one of the things we looked at, okay, where does the service go geographically? And when we first did those splits, we frankly saw that there was an even heavier allocation to Arden Arcade than you see in this presentation. Mm-hmm. And that was an outcome simply of trying to design what we thought was an optimal network from the ground up. But looking at those numerical results, our reaction quite candidly was, even if we think this is an optimal design, we can't do that much of a reallocation from one zone to another. So we went back and we did revisions and we pared it back. Where we ended up with, there are percent splits of 100%. Mm-hmm. So it reflects where some service has changed from one area to another. But that's kind of how that process evolved.
Well, will the Title VI analysis, I assume the Title VI analysis will be much more specific in terms of the socioeconomic character of these areas, and we'll have at least this tool in front of us ready to kind of lend itself to that analysis, so that when we see whatever the percent drop in downtown Sacramento, 3% drop in weekday service in downtown Sacramento, we can kind of compare that to, well, who's in downtown Sacramento, and why should that particular segment of the population suffer a 3% drop in service, right?
Yeah, the Title VI process, I think it will. Title VI doesn't care who gets service geographically. Mm. It's there to make sure we don't unintentionally discriminate against low-income minority. Where disadvantaged populations reside and the routes they ride is directly what drives that analysis.
So you're saying that should kind of, these percentages should kind of already bear themselves out in the course of that analysis. This is a preview of coming attractions, so to speak?
Yet, to put it in the form of an example, if we hypothetically had reallocated service to, rich, privileged neighborhoods and away from disadvantaged neighborhoods, that would come out in the Title VI analysis. We'd find that the percent of our service going to low-income neighborhoods went down significantly. And that's exactly what it examines.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We do have members of the public would like to speak. Mr. Mike Birnbaum.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. And I'm sure you're looking for my guidance toward what the best policy going forward is. So to cut to the chase, I will make a motion based on the staff recommendation. First, to recognize all of the staff involvement on this and the months of work and hours in this. This is not easy. And staff who have certainly put the time and effort and hours into this in the motion deserve a plaque or an award in the next month for their hard work on this project specifically. And I recommend that this draft network be put out for 30-day circulation with the open houses and other workshops mentioned, with the following amendments. And the amendments would be in the route descriptions. Combine Route 15 and Route 88 into one route. The combination of this would occur at the Arden-Del Paso station. The combined route would extend service along West El Camino Avenue, to Director Hansen's point, to Interstate 80 near the 49er truck stop, then use 80 and 5 Richards Boulevard, North 7th, 7th, Q Street, and 8th Street, and end at 8th and O Street, with the return route going up 8th to F, back to North 7th, and following the full alignment all the way to Wattenai 80. This would preserve on the full route, including service to places like Greyhound and the Township 9 development. Extend Route 25 west of the Marconi station along Arcade and Del Paso Boulevards to the Arden Del Paso station, restoring some service that was cut back in 2010. Extending Route 67 from Franklin Station to Delta Shores Shopping Center and the up-and-coming development over in that part of South Sacramento, and creating a new Route 8 around the area of Folsom Boulevard, South Watt Avenue, Jackson Highway, Florin Perkins Road, Fruit Ridge Road, Power Inn Road, 14th Avenue, and 65th Street back to University 65th Street Station. The recommendation, though, for those, because they're being extended and would have additional resources put to it, and I'll close on this thought here, would be to sit down with the affected districts for these route extensions and go after district discretionary funds that the districts have if they have them. And for the area around Florin Perkins, seek to use new Measure U funding to leverage the construction of sidewalk from Belvedere to Jackson Highway, so people have a clear pedestrian path to the College Green station, and they're not walking and flipping off cars while going to the station. It's very dangerous over there.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Robert Copeland.
City Council Member Hanson made a few good points.
Oh, thank you, Robert.
I think new growth development should be responded in the future. I mean, whether it's in southeast of Rancho Cordova, that little area where it's got a smart ride, if that gets any bigger, it should be get a real route to at least one of the light rail stations. As far as this is not as bad as I thought it was, but it's still not. I still don't approve it, but it's not as bad. It's getting better from what I've seen of it. Because we had a discussion Saturday at our SAC True meeting. I still don't like it as well as I could, but it's an improvement in some areas, especially on the some of the bus routes like 25 and 26 on weekdays to extend it. But are people going to ride the buses if you do extend it? Are you going to have a review process and see if these new bus routes do work? And as far as 23 and the 67, 68, combine the routes. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Robert. Barbara Stanton. Followed by Zach Miller.
Good evening, Chair Kennedy and directors. We were at the SAC-TRU meeting, and James did a great job in showing us what the network is all about. The network is very confusing at this. Lots of charts, lots of maps that you really can't read that well. I think people of the public, when they see this presentation, may get confused because you have to remember most people, or some people, or people that ride transit want to know, do I have a bus near me? When is that bus going to come? And can I get from A to B in a timely manner? And most people, that's all they care about. You know, I'm really happy to see that the list of what's going to happen to the various routes will be augmented by hopefully a map that shows each route, similar to what you have on your little handouts now, because that will help people that ride the bus see what's going to happen to their route, or is their route even going to be there. If approved, we would like to see an extension of the comment period, maybe out to 45 or 60 days, because people really have to understand the consequences of the new network. You know, Mr. Cerna had a great comment about, is it really going to reach everybody, or is someone going to come out 6 months from now and see that their bus isn't going to be there? You know, it's very hard to get people to come out, and no matter how you try, people are going to fall through the cracks. But I think if you market it really well, it might work. But anyway, those are our comments, and thank you very much. And yes, we did have a concern about the 34, Steve, and thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach Miller. Followed by Tom Pace.
Good evening. I first want to compliment staff and the general manager. This is a really difficult undertaking, and I understand the need for RIT to do something bold and innovative. But this plan as written may backfire. The headline will be, RIT proposes to cut a third of its existing bus routes. The plan has great intentions, but it may go a bit too far. It has what I might call a tunnel vision for 15-minute service and weekend service. I'm concerned that this overemphasis is based on a few perhaps faulty assumptions. The first is that infrequent service is necessarily poor service. That's not always true for commuters. What matters is that service is on time and dependable. Recent innovations like the RT mobile app are steps in the right direction. And by the way, when people were asked and said they don't like hourly service, well, sure. But were they then asked, would they prefer no service instead? Because that's the current proposal. Second faulty assumption. Adding weekday service is more important than adding weekend service is more important than losing weekday service. A lot of RT riders don't use transit on the weekend, and that's okay for them, right? Look at a lot of state workers who take RT to their jobs downtown. Strong weekday service coverage is essential for getting people to and from work. And third and last, waiting and walking are not necessarily fungible as the plan assumes. People may ride because they can work or study while waiting. They may be okay with waiting for that 30 or 60-minute bus, but not walking to a wholly different route. So I urge you to reconsider the conclusions that flow from these assumptions, namely that 1/3 of existing bus routes should be cut to accommodate 15-minute and weekend service. I would suggest keeping weekday commuter routes, and instead of eliminating them entirely, consider moving weekend service from those routes to these high-frequency routes that you're focusing on. I also suggest looking more closely at the routes being considered for elimination and apply what I think Director maybe Hansen was getting at, some qualitative criteria in addition to the quantitative calculations that the plan and the consultants used. For instance, routes that serve employment centers or planned infill developments should not be eliminated. By way of example, This report proposes eliminating the Route 38, which serves UC Davis Medical Center and the developments on 65th Street and the planned Aggie Square on Broadway. It would be counterproductive to eliminate that route and others like it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pace, followed by Jeffrey Tardaguia.
Good evening, Chair Kennedy and members of the board. I'm Tom Pace, Planning Director for the City of Sacramento. I commend you for undertaking this effort and thank RT staff for including me in the planning effort. I spent a week with RT staff, consultants, and staff from other local cities in the county learning about how to design bus networks. And personally, I learned a lot about bus transit, which has been really helpful, especially because we have tended to focus on planning around light rail stations over the years. Given that much more of our county is served by bus lines than light rail, the opportunities for transit-oriented development along bus lines are much greater. We at the City of Sacramento are trying to increase transit ridership and reduce congestion, improve air quality, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and support equitable economic development. Currently, the city has a proposed transit-oriented development ordinance before City Council tomorrow night that will help support better planning around light rail stations. We are also in the process of updating our general plan and are looking for opportunities to create more affordable housing sites citywide. As you continue in this process, I would encourage your board to consider maximizing the number of possible routes that could be offered at 15-minute intervals along corridors that have the greatest potential to generate ridership, such as areas with high-intensity employment and high-density housing. Frequent service increases the area that riders can access. Ideally, affordable housing would be located near high-quality transit service. The more high-frequency bus service we have, the more we can create housing opportunities for our workforce and communities in need of affordable housing. Doing this will also help us achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals. Also, such corridors can be good places for new jobs that can be accessed by transit, which will further our goals for equitable economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm working at it. I'm just getting there. Few pain pills later. Well, board, because both my elevator in my building and because the 5 o'clock train wasn't there, I didn't make public comment. So I'm hoping that Star made the emphasis to you that, guys, you need to not be pushing this forward until you comprehend and understand what you are proposing to do. And I think, as you've alluded to a number of things, and the county has a number of more things, that you are going to know more information in June. And I think you really should plan on your calendar both more workshops that develop it, as well as specifically to the communities that you are proposing to eliminate. For you, Patrick, and for you, Phil, you are supposedly champions for the homeless. And yet this proposal eliminates both the 33 and the 15 from anything on Richards Boulevard. So that whole area and community will have no transportation, except for the 11 going up 7th Street and getting to the 5. These are some of the changes that you need to examine much clearer, much further. You need to consider what centers you have and whether, if I say to you, do you guys know where Bel Air Bus Transit Hub is? Now, I know you board don't know it, but does anybody on RT's planning staff know where the Bel Air Transit Hub is located at? I give that as an example of if you go all the way into bus routes, so you determine what is there. You go to the places and find out what is changing, which is you're alluding to and seeing what is changing and going on. This is a best effort, and this is so much better than 10 years ago when you cut down service, and we had to have Mike get in here and say, you can't cut service this way, and we've had for 10 years the system that we're currently residing on. Yet,
How many libraries are no longer going to be served with public bus transportation? How many other centers are not going to be served through here? It seems to me like for every route that you cut, you need to figure out what 5 points are getting eliminated. I will Wednesday be back talking about changes. I agree with what Mike says, that the 38, you need to have something that's going out probably way further, and you need to figure out what for downtown, and you need to figure out what's going for the future. One of the other characteristics is many of these things mean that it's a minimum of 4+ blocks that you have to walk to get to a bus location. And for your senior community, that's hard.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That is the last card that we have from the public. Is there any other? Vice Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like to move this item forward to public comment. Hopefully the staff can take into account what the board and the public have said. I think Mike Barnbaum made some very specific recommendations. So I hope that we can continue this dialogue and refine the route even further. I'd also say our fixed route system, as Director Cerna pointed out, downtown may decrease in some bus service, but our fixed route system serves most of that central city area. And I see those as complementary, as do I the Smart Ride service that is potentially being pioneered through STA. But Mr. Pace's comments, I think, were very good, too, about how we leverage the assets that we have through commercial corridors and our city partners. So with those comments, I'll move the item.
The chair will second. Mr. Hume.
Yeah, thank you. Either of the Jameses, do you have, on the slide for the existing network, you have a breakdown of 23% frequency, 77% coverage. Do you have those same figures for the new network as well as the more frequent network?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Slide 5?
I think the answer is yes. I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Yeah, okay. I can jump to it here, too. So your question is these percent frequent figures, if we can get those for the other networks?
Yes, please.
Yeah, we have
We do
those.
have those.
Yeah.
I think it might be one of
That's probably one of the ones I glossed over.
Could be. But I think it's an important metric because it kind of shows the priorities. So, okay, so for frequent service goes up to 29%.
Yeah, and what that indicates is that on weekdays, we spend essentially 23% of our vehicle hours on frequent service, 15 minutes or more frequent, and 29% in the case of the new network.
Okay, and then what about under the more frequent network?
Let me skip ahead.
46%.
46% frequency?
Yeah, the bottom row in the red there indicates that the more frequent network would devote 46% of vehicle hours to frequent service.
Okay. And so to the speaker's point about sort of ramping up weekend service at the sacrifice of weekday service, did your analysis take into account as far as the demographic of the ridership with respect to, a downtown employee who's using the service to get downtown on the weekdays but wouldn't necessarily use service on the weekends? In other words, are we putting in place service that not going to be used when we could bump this frequency service? Because I think part of the thing for me is a barrier for spontaneous ridership is the idea if I have to look up and plan and have I just missed it, so now I've got 40 minutes before I can catch it again. Whereas if we can get to those 15-minute frequencies, that's kind of a walk out the door and I'm willing to stand there for 12 minutes. So did we take into account the makeup of the ridership?
Well, I'd say it's kind of a balancing act. When we spoke on Saturday, that was a point that was brought up that a lot of the work of the consultant has been to illustrate the benefits of that frequent 15-minute service to make it like a real big city network, almost like a subway. You go there, you know, bus will come. But that's also very expensive. And the point was made that for irregular travel, for walk-up travel, having a frequent network really helps. But if you are a commuter, if you ride the same bus every day, it might not be that essential for you to have frequent service. It might be very important for it to be reliable, but not necessarily for it to be frequent. So, I mean, we've tried to take that into consideration, and I don't think there's any one perfect right answer. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah. So part of the analysis that we looked at was ridership by time of day. And on some of our routes, fixed routes that would operate all day, we could see where there's definitely peak in trips. And there are a few where we show that the route has been eliminated from all-day service, but we may offer it as an express service. So that's something that we have been looking at, and we did take a look at some of that data as well. I don't think we showed it very clearly in the presentation, but that is something that we did look at.
And is that's something that the system is malleable enough to basically run buses certain places only when the riders demand it? Or the ridership justifies it?
Yeah, I can give you a couple examples. In Land Park, Southland Park, Greenhaven, today we have 2 hourly routes, Route 2 and Route 6, that are very well utilized going into town in the morning and leaving town in the afternoon. And other than that, they're pretty poorly utilized. And we've proposed elimination of both those routes as all-day regular routes and converting them to peak-only routes that just run those busy trips, and that's it. A similar thing is what we proposed with Route 34, too, to kind of go back to that earlier observation. We have a couple trips on Route 34 that are well used, and frankly, the remainder of the trips are pretty poorly used. So we've proposed retaining the good ones and keeping the less used ones.
Well, I think those types of efficiencies really are what's going to sort of allow us to do more with less and build this network. And you talk about a big city. Do more with the same. Do more with the same, yeah. You talk about building a big city network, and you know, I think one of the problems we have in this region is that because it is so spread out versus, say, a San Francisco where you have a finite area with which to deal. You know, when we try to be everywhere to everyone, it becomes cost prohibitive, and you're running a bus once an hour, whereas you could run a pretty robust network and say that, to some of the people's points about consistency, that network is sacrosanct, thou service shall never be cut. And then you'll see ridership atrophy in those areas that it didn't make sense to run the buses out there and relocate into the area. And so you're actually building better ridership in the areas that you're serving better. So I think, you know, I would like to see more aggressive on the frequency commitment than the coverage commitment. But I appreciate the work that's gone into this so far.
Mr. Lee and then Director Jennings.
I just wanted to first thank a whole bunch of people who meeting with us, Jessica and James, on Saturday SAC Truth meeting. We heard some great comments, and I'm particularly happy to say even Robert changed his mind a little bit. You know, this option is actually what our consultant recommended. They want more frequent, service. But our planning staff really, talk to so many, community stakeholders and try to be more, accommodating, try to be more, a little bit more conservative. So we have been struggling in between. So we heard lots of comments today. So this is what we plan to do. And originally we set up 5 open house, workshops in next month or so. Then try to bring this back to board for board, decision, one way or another. I think we're going to extend this 30 days, listening period to 45 days. So until the February 25th instead of January 27. I forget the board meeting date. So if we do that, we can hear more. We can make further changes. Even, we can make Robert agree with us. That would be great. So in the meantime, I just want all of us to realize, even we implement this in June or July timeframe, every 3 months we will do the run cuts, again and again. So from June to September, from October to December, we will further refine, improve our design. So, hopefully by early 2020, our system will become much more, robust, and majority of people will be happy with our system at that time, and that will give a great, boost confidence on RT's, system, and hope we can, get more support in 2020. Some different initiatives at that time. So that's very much our plan. Hopefully, we can work together with all the stakeholders to make some great improvement on our system.
Okay, thank you. And before we get to Mr. Jennings, there was a suggestion that we go from 30 to 45 days. Does the maker of the motion accept that?
Yes. Is there a magic to 45 versus 60?
Because if we wait until March, because we at least need 4 months to prepare for the implementation. This will be a huge undertaking to actually implement. A week earlier and a week later, when we implement that, we probably need to deploy over 200 volunteers on different key locations and tell people, hey, you stop or cut. And you stop. The new stops will be some places. So, and in the meantime, the run cutting actually is in March timeframe for the June, July, service. So that's very much, the reason. And if we continue to delay to March, then we will implement in September. Some people say, somebody just said too late. If that is the will of the whole community, we can wait. But that is not wise decision from staff perspective.
It's fine. I was just curious.
Okay. Yes. I just wanted to.
Maker of the motion and the seconder agrees. Mr. Jennings.
Thank you very much. So I think Henry, you kind of answered my question and the point that I wanted to make. We've spent 8 months of outreach to date, which I think is a considerable amount of time. But I do agree that as we start moving towards this process, the review process, I think 30 days is far too short. And so I do think that we need more opportunity for the public to come out. I think we need to do a good job of making sure that the public comes out in areas that maybe you have not been able to reach. And so my suggestion would have been to move it to 45 days and then come back before the board with an update as to what we've learned over those 45 days, and then we would have the ability to add another period of time onto it without making a definitive time at this meeting. But so I'm happy to hear 45 days. What I would add to it is to get a report back from those 45 days so we can then turn around and make another decision as to whether or not we need more time.
We will bring back in the later part of January. So, before the 45 days run out, then that board meeting we will say, hey, this is our progress, and we can make further improvements.
Right. And I want to make sure that from my standpoint, my district, that we are having groups out there that maybe provide input that have not done so far, so that we give you a full list of those that are in District 7 that maybe have not had an opportunity to weigh in. But I'd like to make sure that I've looked at your list of who's there and who has not been there, our neighborhood associations, some of our service groups in the area. I want to make sure that they get an opportunity to weigh in during this 45-day period.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. With that, then, we are now, we have modified the staff recommendation to 45 days. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain?
Motion carries at 97 votes.
14A.
14A, resolution Temporary
read it into the
appointment of
record.
Mark Lonergan, et cetera.
Okay. We actually do have a motion by Vice Chair Hanson and second by Director Hume, but we do have a card. Barbara Stanton.
Chair Kennedy and directors. We just want to, Ridership for the Masses wants to congratulate Mark Lonergan on his retirement, and we want to thank him for his years of working with us. We've worked together for many years. He's always been open to us, whether I bring him something that doesn't belong to him, he'll pass it on, or he'll tell me what to do, and we were really grateful for that. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you. I think we'll all agree that everything belongs to Mark Lonergan. So, with that, any more comments, questions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Thank you.
Motion carries at 97 votes. Next item is the General Manager's Report, item number 15.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and the public. Today, we will first present one Employee Service Award to Mr. Aaron Fong for 40 years of long and dedicated service to the district. Aaron, and you. Aaron started with Sacramento as a bus driver on July 1978. In March 1986, he was promoted to transportation supervisor. In January 1999, he became a scheduling analyst too. Please join me in welcoming Aaron's parents. Your parents here? Yeah. Yeah, please. And have a picture with Mr. Chairman.
You too.
We just talk about, Mark will retire, but he will still be with us. And he has been an integral part of the district for nearly 41 years, tirelessly dedicating his time and expertise to improve the access for all Sacramentans. His hard work, commitment, and dedication are worth of admiration and will be greatly missed. In retirement, he will come back to play a major role in supporting the district with various projects, which 1/3 of the cost. Another news, as you know, in September, the Sacramento board approved a reduction in fares and increase in light rail service on weekend. The fare reduction was implemented in October of this year. We see some very positive impact on ridership. Starting January 6th, Sacramento will officially begin to operate 15-minute service on our light rail system during the weekends. The 43 miles of light rail track are a regional asset, and we believe this service enhancement will make a significant differences in the lives of many of our riders. Also, your board just approved the tentative agreement, labor negotiation union agreement with ASME supervisors group. During a 6-month period, SACRT team is in negotiation or will negotiate with new union contracts with 4 labor unions, starting from the ASME supervisors group. Then, we will negotiate with ATU, MCAG, and the AEA in next couple of months. The guiding principles of the SACRT team for those negotiations are fairness, reasonableness, and equity. Last Friday, we ASME supervisor group and the SACRT team reached agreement, and this sets up a great model for the next 3 union negotiations. I want to sincerely thank the supervisor negotiation team led by Supervisor Stephen Smith, its business agent Wendy Parrington, and all 90 supervisors for a great partnership and collaboration. Also, I want to thank our board chair, Kennedy, and the directors, Chenier and Latoni, for their invaluable support during this very unique and very tough negotiation process in last couple months. Certainly, I want to thank all SACRT negotiation team, all members, for their extraordinary hard work, professionalism, and dedication for reaching a very successful contract, which will ensure we will pay our union members competitively nationwide and improve agency-wide morale, and saves millions of dollars over a 4-year period, which will help to further ensure a stable financial future for SACRT if we're not going to see an economic recession. But that's a second different story. Another great news is we wrap up the year-end and celebrate the annexation agreement with 2 of our regional partners, City of Folsom and the City of Central Heights. And in the meantime, we are in the negotiation with City of Elk Grove on the service contract, which we have made some great progress. Early today, we will notice that the staff at the California Strategic Growth Council is recommending SHRA for $23 million funding through the Transformative Climate Community TCC grant program. Last year, SHRA applied for this grant to improve the Dos Rios community in the River District, and they applied for $23 million. They did not get. This year, they get recommendation from the staff. They're going to get $23 million, and more exciting is, out of this $23 million, $17.5 million will be dedicated to SACRT to build the Dos Rios light rail station and the track alignment. This is unbelievable news. We're very excited about this great partnership. We were joking with SHRA, they become half transit agency now. We will make, we believe we will make this happen quickly, and we will make the monumental differences in the lives of those residents in that community. So at this year-end holiday season, I want to take this opportunity to thank all our riders and supporters, especially 4 of our ambassadors for a great support and a successful ambassadorship in 2018. They are Jeff Targaya, may not be right, Mike Babin, Russell Rollins, and Barbara Staten. Thank you very much. And certainly, I also want to wish our board members, the public, and the over 1,200 SAC staff and the contractors a Merry Christmas and a wonderful, safe New Year. Thank you. This concludes my GM report and my 2018 job. Another 20 days.
Director Harris.
So, Henry, thank you for bringing up the TCC grant. This is pretty remarkable. The Twin Rivers development will be the largest affordable housing development in the city of Sacramento for many, many years. And the fact that we're building the light rail station means that it's a transit-oriented development. So if you heard Tom Pace's comments earlier, this is exactly the direction that we want to go. It's a very significant achievement to get this $23 million out on the second try. We applied for $30 million a year ago, and we're not successful. But the fact that this can be almost, well, it does assure the building of the 12th Street Dos Rios light rail station is very positive for RT and the city generally. So, great news.
All right, any other questions, comments? Okay, we do have two members of the public. Mike Barnbaum.
Thank you, and thank you, Henry. That was humbling and surprising. First of all, I want to congratulate Owner and Chief Operating Officer Mark Lonergan on a very successful career, 40 years at Regional Transit, and that we begin 2019 with two new owners and chief operating officers. I'd like to give special recognition in the audience today to Alva Carrasco and Doug Cook. Congratulations on your promotions effective New Year's Day. Some upcoming meetings I'd like to mention, and then one more comment after them. Wednesday, December 12th at 6 p.m. is the contract or annexation at the Elk Grove City Council meeting, item 10.1. Thursday, December 13th at 7 p.m. Is the annexation item at the Citrus Heights City Council, and I'd like to recognize in the audience from the city of Citrus Heights, Mary Poole. She's still here? Okay. Tuesday, December 18th is the Roseville Transportation Commission at 7 p.m. Friday, January 25th is the first San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority meeting for 2019. Wednesday, January 30th at 6 p.m. is the first Paratransit Board of Directors meeting, and if they have a quorum, we'll consider the remaining meeting schedule for 2019. Monday, February 11th, with no RT board meeting that night, it is the meeting night of the YOLO County Transportation District at 7 p.m. Wednesday, the 20th of February, is the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority first meeting of 2019 at 10 a.m. in Sassoon City. And then after the 45-day period is up from item 14 is Monday, the 25th of February, right back here at 5:30 for this board. So a lot of meetings coming up and a lot of exciting news. Final and ending comment for 2019. Chair Kennedy, it's been a honor and privilege that you are the chair of this board, and there's an intent motion that continue.
Running out of time.
I not only consider you as a good friend and what I would say as a colleague, but a family member too. Thank you, Judy and Sinead, for being a part of what we do and helping you and the board on transportation policy going forward. Thank you.
Mike, thank you very much. Thank you for your dedication to RT.
Thank you.
Jeffrey Tartagia.
Jeffrey Tartagia, to Patrick and to Henry. Accountability. You still have to work on the I-80. Have not heard anything going forward on that progress. Also to you, Patrick. The other thing is for the old board members, and I believe, Pat, I better do a good job of explaining what happened at the last paratransit meeting, the consequences, the unintentional ones, the non-ADA, and what the public hearing really will focus on.
Jeffrey, you have a card in for that item, so.
Yes, well, I'm gonna. This is hopefully hopefully he's gonna explain that, and getting me now to prepare for it. But the thing that I'm going to bring up to this board is a decade ago you said when things that affect paratransit that you would have a joint meeting. And both of the things that are being proposed and the, shall we say, October reduction of ridership or reduction of price there had an impact on paratransit's budget. You guys please need to have that joint meeting that you have not had in a very long time, so you realize the direction, the consequences, and you're going to have to figure out how do you grandfather now what you don't have and what you do for the future. I think it's time that you consider a joint meeting that you haven't done in a very long time, and there's issues that really you need to figure out and focus. And in that part, I suggest and think, Henry, you may not be able to keep the $3 million from paratransit because with all these things, you're going to have probably a lot more paratransit ridership just because the distance that is being proposed. And I don't think you've understood that impact yet.
Okay, thank you. That is the last card I have for this item.
Item number 16, Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority meeting summary of November 14th in your packages. If Directors Harris or Miller have anything further to add.
I just wanted to highlight their ridership is, well, they have a 58% fare box recovery ratio, which I think is very impressive, and their on-time performance is 93%. I think that's second in the nation. It was also interesting to hear talk about a second Transbay Tube crossing that Capital Corridor will be partnering with the stakeholders down in the Bay Area. And they've also launched, finally, after years and years, positive train control, so we're not going to have freight trains and passenger trains running into each other, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
So,
great.
Pleasure to attend those meetings.
Thank you.
And good job on the notes, Director Harris.
17.
If I may, Chair.
Yes.
I'd just like to piggyback on that. The positive train control is a really unique idea, and now implemented. We'll have to wait and see, exactly how they work out the bugs, but significant safety improvement. I'd also like to say that telecommuting was really fun, and that it saved a tremendous amount of time. It takes us a full day generally to go to these Capital Corridor meetings. And I would invite my fellow director to telecommute anytime you're feeling the squeeze.
Thank you for the hospitality and having me at your office. And thank you, Anna, for doing the notes. I know it was really you.
All right.
Next item, item 17, San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority meeting summary of November 16th in your packages. If Director Hume has anything further to add.
Nothing to add, but I will say I drove to be there in person in the lovely metropolis of Martinez, but I will be telecommuting to the next meeting in Fresno. So,
thank you.
Next item, item 18, Paratransit Inc. Board of Directors meeting summary of November 19th. If Director Hume has anything further to
President Hume.
Yeah, incoming President Hume. Thank you, Mr. Hanson.
You picked the right man.
Well, hopefully this year at Paratrans will be a little more memorable than my year as chair here on the RT board. Might stick out in people's minds once it's concluded. Nothing to add, but I will say as far with respect to what Mr. Tardigia mentioned is Paratransit is looking to have a separate policy for their CTSA trips, which are non-ADA trips, which means trips that Paratransit provides that do not get billed back to RT with respect to the cancel and no-show policy. To hold them at a different standard than what is required from the FTA under ADA trips.
All right.
That item was pulled and will be coming back to an agenda in the future.
Thank you. We do have one card, Jeffrey Tardigia. You have pretty close to exhausted this subject already, Jeffrey, but go ahead.
Well, do you understand what a non-ADA ride means? Because once bus service disappears, you then have it. And this means a reduction in the service for all riders to 10:30. That is what it does reflectively mean. And that's a concern, and with the projection of changes going on there, of what that also has as an impact. And that's what I offer as significance. It was stated as being reason for these 15-plus resolutions about non-ADA was because of the annexations that are going on. And so the explanations of what is being stranded. And so we now have a thorough explanation offered out there. For the rest of you, please read that and understand what that does offer and mean. Because right now this ends January 2nd, and it's another full month. So right now over the Christmas holidays, people prepare a transit. Do not realize that this public hearing is going on in this discussion, and it had to be real quick and brief, and because Mary didn't last too long, so you've got all the other things that have to be done in January, and my understanding is now January 28th, but January 30th, so it's moved from Monday to Wednesday, is that correct? And that's something I think, this is the time. So I bring you with the paratransit. You're going to have another meeting of RT. I think it would be helpful in January if you consider what time paratransit could be. And since he is the incoming president, you might find out what would be a good date to join.
Thank you. All right, that is all the cards I have. Is there any questions or comments from the board? We have no closed session item this evening. So with that, we are adjourned, and Happy New Year, everybody.